Good morning, guys. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video. We are back in the garage with the S65. The E92 M3 is getting some necessary maintenance today. I have been putting this one off for quite a while. Now, everybody knows if you own an S65, one of the maintenance items that you must address in these cars, especially on the higher mileage versions, are the throttle actuators. Being that the motor is a V8, you have 4 individual throttle bodies on each side. Each bank of throttle bodies is controlled by a throttle actuator. These throttle actuators are known to fail in these cars. Luckily, we have companies like Evolve Automotive that are constantly improving the components in these engines. The guys over at Evolve have developed an up-rated throttle actuator. Inside of the OEM throttle actuators, there are 2 main failure points. There's an electronic board located in each throttle actuator that can actually overheat and go bad over time. In addition to that, each throttle actuator has plastic gearing inside, which allows the throttle actuator to function. Being that the gears are plastic and these throttle actuators get quite hot, the plastic gears can actually deteriorate over time. As the plastic gears deteriorate, throttle response can reduce, and in some cases, the plastic gears can break entirely. If this does happen, your car will throw codes, it'll go into limp mode, and in some extreme cases, you won't even be able to drive the car. You'll lose all throttle function. Our friends over at Evolve Automotive have come up with a solution for this. They have taken the factory throttle actuators and upgraded all of the gears inside to superior materials. All of the electronics inside are also checked and changed. Basically, what they do is they replace all of the internal components with higher rated versions. And the best part about these throttle actuators offered by Evolve Automotive is they have a lifetime warranty. Yes, that means if your throttle actuators ever fail again in the future, they will be replaced for free. So as long as you are the original purchaser of these throttle actuators, you do not have to worry about them again in the future. I don't know about you guys, but that is a no-brainer, and that is why I went with Evolve. So really, it's just a matter of time before your factory throttle actuators go bad. Especially if you have higher mileage on your E92 M3, you are just running that risk of a failing actuator. Now, this isn't a catastrophic failure. The car will go into limp mode, it will throw some codes, but you should be able to get the car home so you can at least address the throttle actuators. Rather than just replacing the factory throttle actuators with the OEM ones over and over again, which are super expensive and will just continue to fail down the road, it makes a whole lot more sense to go with the uprated ones from Evolve. We are going to be replacing mine today. I do not know if they have ever been replaced in this car, and I have 98,000 miles on this car. So I'm actually really curious to see if I'm just really lucky and I've made it this long on factory actuators, or if they have been updated at some point. Either way, going with the Evolve makes sure that we are pretty much going to be bulletproof for the future, and even if something does go wrong, I'll get them replaced for free again. This job actually isn't too difficult. The throttle actuators are located underneath the plenum and underneath a plastic wiring harness. Like I said before, the throttle actuators control each bank of throttle bodies. So you have 4 throttle bodies on each side. You have 1 actuator on each side controlling each bank of throttle bodies. So naturally, we need to get underneath this plenum and locate our throttle actuators. I'm going to show you guys roughly how to do this job, but there are a ton of videos out there on this procedure, and it's very, very easy. Anyone can do this at home. As long as you have the necessary and basic tools to perform this job, it shouldn't be a problem. One thing that I will mention is you will probably want some sort of scanning tool, so when you do connect your new throttle actuators, you can make sure that they are in fact functioning and the car is not throwing any codes before you put everything back together. In addition to replacing the throttle actuators today, you guys, we are also going to be replacing the fuel tank vent valve. This is one of those things that you just address while you're there. It is also pretty common for these to go bad. It has a number of symptoms like a rough idle. So while we're in there, we're just going to replace this as well. All right, first things first, we're going to pop off this little plastic cover in the front that feeds the air intake system. 2 8mm screws, couple of push pins, and it's out. Time to remove the air box and the air intake. I like to do this basically as one entire piece, but of course you can do it piece by piece if you want to. Loosen up the clamps. There is a vacuum hose in the back that you need to unclip, and then the whole thing should come right out. Next, we need to loosen each clamp on the individual throttle bodies or the trumpets. And I like to use this extension right here. It has a lot of flexibility in it and it allows me to really get into tight places. You're gonna have 4 clamps on each side for each bank. Go ahead and loosen all 8. On the driver's side, you're also gonna have a plastic connection in the back that you need to unclip. Typically, this connection has a plastic clip on the top of it. Mine is actually broken, so I just pulled it directly out. I need to replace that. Then I like to take out the 10 millimeters on the coolant reservoir so I can move the coolant reservoir out of the way. It gives me a little bit more room to access the 8 millimeter clamps on the passenger side. And next we're going to unclip the air intake temperature sensor right here. And underneath the plenum, there's one more hose-like connection that should have a clip on it. I'm going to pull that off, and then we should be able to remove the entire plenum. It might take a little bit of force. Here is that connector right here. You're basically just pressing down and pulling that out. Mine is actually broken as well, so that is another thing I get to replace. All right, so now we're at the point where the plenum is off. Take a look at these beautiful individual throttle bodies. Imagine not having 8 individual throttle bodies. I don't know what my life would be like. But this is where the magic happens. So you have 2 banks of 4 individual throttle bodies. Right here is one of the arms that is leading to the throttle actuator, and then right here is the other arm that's leading to the other throttle actuator. So both of those throttle actuators are underneath this wiring harness, basically this giant plastic piece right here. So what we have to do is remove all of the plugs that come out of this wiring harness up here so we can fold this back, get access to the throttle actuators, pop these arms off, and then go ahead and remove everything. So in terms of plugs, you have quite a few plugs, and you're going to want to remember where all of these plugs go, but for the most part, it shouldn't be too difficult. First connection is the water temperature plug. Disconnect that. The next connection is the oil pressure sensor. It's a little difficult to get at, also difficult to film, but here it is down here. You'll see it in this little crevice. First connection is right up top in front of you. It's just got a metal clip on it. Press it down, pull it off. Then you have this plastic connection right here. Should be able to pull that out. Then you have a bulkhead connector right here. Go ahead and remove that. And this one down here is the exhaust Vanos connection for bank 1. Go ahead and unclip that. And this tiny plug all the way at the bottom here is the AC compressor clutch connection. Go ahead and disconnect that as well. And now we can start removing the 4 10 millimeter nuts that secure the plastic wiring harness cover. And this right here is the plug for actuator bank 1. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect that. This one on the other side is the actuator plug for bank 2. Disconnect that. There is one more plug underneath the wiring harness cover. Go ahead and lift that up and unplug it. It's right here. And now we can fish the front of the wiring harness loom onto the top of the engine so we can move this entire wiring harness cover out of the way. I'm just going to use a pole to hoist up the harness cover so I can work freely and have access to the actuators. Next, we have to unclip the actuator arms. They should pop right off. Go ahead and disconnect the actuator bank 1 arm as well. And now we have 6 T30 Torx bolts that we need to remove that bolt down each throttle actuator. These can be a bit tricky to get out. I like to use a long extension and a magnet as well so I can pull out the bolt as soon as it's free and I don't risk dropping it into the engine bay somewhere. This is what the extension setup and the magnet look like. This seems to work really well. And at this point, our actuators are free to come out. The actuator on bank 2 is a little bit more difficult to get out underneath the wire loom. Might have to do a little twisting, a little turning, but eventually you can get it out. Actuator over on bank 1 is a little bit easier. Just go ahead and pull both of them out. All right, factory actuators are out. Now, my M3 is a 2008 model, and as you will see, the dates on these, 9/18/2014, 6/24/2014. So that means that my throttle actuators have been replaced in this car. When were they replaced? I don't know. But the car does have 100,000 miles on it, so could have been replaced at 50,000 miles, 60,000 miles, 80. We really have no idea. For most people, this is just a preventative maintenance item, and you really don't know if or when yours were replaced, unless, of course, that maintenance item has been disclosed to you when you buy the car. So 9 times out of 10, it's sort of a gamble. But of course, none of that matters today because we are upgrading to the Evolve throttle actuators, which in the long run is just going to make a lot more sense. In case anything does fail down the road, I have a lifetime warranty now. So for some people, this job might seem a bit overwhelming. It's really not. You just want to make sure when you are plugging everything back in and installing the new throttle actuators, you are assigning each plug to the correct location, which really isn't that difficult. The wiring loom itself sort of lays the plugs out in a position where you can't really screw them up. I'd say the part where you need to be the most careful is where you're removing the small T30 bolts that hold in the actuator. They are pretty deep down there, and you're definitely going to want to have a magnet of sort to grab them and pull them out of the engine bay. If you are worried about dropping any of the hardware into your throttle bodies, you can of course put something in there to cover it up, like paper towel or a rubber glove over it. Personally, I'm not too concerned with that. Just make make sure that you check all of the throttle bodies before you button everything up and of course turn on the car. That would not be good. Outside of that, this is a pretty easy process, you guys. At this point, we're going to be assembling the new throttle bodies. Some people do like to go ahead and replace the arms as well at the same time. They really aren't an expensive part, but I'm just going to go ahead and reuse these arms on here. They look perfectly fine. And just so you guys are aware, bank 1 and bank 2 are identical part numbers, so these are the exact same. Can't really mix them up in terms of which one goes where. But what we want to do now is just pop off the other arm, and we're going to go ahead and throw these arms onto the new actuators, and then we can go ahead and throw them in the car. And now it's time to tackle this fuel vent breather valve. I've got to say, I expected this to be extremely easy, and it gave me much more of a hassle than anything else in this entire project, but sometimes that's just how it goes. I ended up breaking this thing in half because I didn't have the right tool to remove part of the clip that feeds into the line on the other side. Not really the end of the world since we are replacing this and I have a brand new one. You just got to be aware of some of these plastic pieces because they are brittle from all of the heat. All right, it is officially time to put in our new throttle actuators. I'm going to start with the throttle actuator in bank 1, and then once I get all of the T30s in for that, I'm going to start working on the throttle actuator in bank 2. Bank 1 is much easier to get in. Bank 2 might take a little bit more finessing. And once we do that, we're going to go ahead and fasten all of the arms, make sure that our T30s are tight, and we can start working on the plugs. Just remember to plug everything in back where it goes, fasten our 10 millimeters on the wiring harness cover, and then start reconnecting all of the plugs up front back where they belong. All right, so we are at the point where we have everything plugged in, minus the few plugs and vacuum connections that need to go into the plenum. We officially have our throttle actuators in, along with both of the arms clipped on. And so now what we're gonna do, just to make sure that we have every single plug plugged back in, even though I'm confident that I reconnected every single one, I don't wanna put the intake and plenum and all of the individual throttle body clamps back on just to find out that I forgot one connection. So a good way to figure this out is to hop into the car, throw on a scanner, and see what codes it brings up. We aren't going to start the car, but we'll put the car into accessory mode, and if one of the plugs is unplugged, the scanner tool will tell us. All right, so I'm going to be using a generic scanner tool. Got this off of Amazon. Really anything that can diagnose codes in your car will be suitable. We're going to go ahead and plug it into the OBD2 port, and then we can go ahead and put the car into accessory mode. So since we were doing all of this work on the car, I may or may not throw a few codes right off the bat. So I'm gonna go ahead and just erase all the codes. Codes cleared, okay. Now we're gonna go back to read codes. So the only code that we have is an intake air temperature sensor, which we know is already unplugged. That is the only code that comes up for us. So that means that we are good to go and we covered all of our bases with all of the other connections that we had to make. I do have another 2 codes that will eventually pop back up because they are for my catalytic monitors. So I just recently put on a titanium exhaust. It does have high flow catalytic converters. Sometimes those can throw codes for the O2 sensors, but if you get a tune, that takes care of it. So our friends at Evolve are sending us their tune. That will eliminate our check engine light for the O2 sensors, and we'll get a little more power. All right, man, let's finish this thing up. Throw the plenum back onto all of the individual throttle bodies. Got to really make sure that everything is tight and snug here. It's easy to miss some of those throttle body clamps. You just want to make sure the plenum is seated. Go ahead and refasten all of the throttle body clamps. Then refasten the 10 millimeter bolts on our coolant reservoir. And now just put back in the entire air intake system and all of the other plastic pieces. And I'm going to use some of this motor plast that I got. I'll have it linked down below. This is great for dressing up the engine bay. It's not too glossy, not too shiny. It has a real OEM finish. And that, my friends, is a job well done. Looking nice and clean, everything back in the engine bay where it should be. I do think this engine bay could use a few more things in terms of plenum, intake, valve covers. More to come on that soon. But I've got to say, this is a pretty easy job. As long as you guys have some of the basic tools, you can knock this out. Should only take you a couple of hours. If it's your first time doing it, take it slow. Make sure to keep tabs on all of the plugs. But for the most part, anyone with a little bit of experience can do this job. Now that we have everything back together, there is only one thing left to do, and that is to hop in the car and see how this thing feels when we are driving it. It is very possible that with these new throttle actuators, we could notice a better throttle response. I had a suspicion that my old throttle actuators were replaced at some point, being that this car almost has 100,000 miles on it. It is a 2008. I would have been shocked if the original throttle actuators would have made it this long. But preventatively, I'm glad I decided to take care of it and went with Evolve because it has a lifetime warranty. I'm good. I no longer have to worry about it. Let's hop in the car and see how this thing feels. It's safe to say that this one was a success, my friends. No issues, no codes, no problems, no hesitations. That is exactly what I want to see when we finish up an install. We go for a little drive. Man, this car is just so fun to drive right now. Fresh with the exhaust, the new transmission mounts. Whoo! It's a blast to drive. Huge shout out to my friends over at Evolve for sending out these throttle actuators. Like I said before, I just think they're the way to go. And it's good to know that in the future, if anything happens, we're taken care of. We don't really have to worry about anything, which is just that peace of mind is worth it alone. I'm gonna have everything you guys saw in this video linked down below. Make sure you check it out. If you want some merch. Woo! Screams! If you guys want any merch, also have that link down below. But I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!